Hello, my name is Jess and welcome to the Storyteller Fox. Come along and listen to read aloud books, be it for bedtime, story time, or simply to read along.
This is a story of a girl named Jane Goodall. She is an inspiring figure with a lifelong love of animals. As you can see at the front cover of this book, there's Jane Goodall and a monkey right behind her back. Well, let's get right into it and learn more about her. Little People, Big Dreams, Jane Goodall. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Beatrice Shiroshi. Do you love animals too? And what is your favorite animal? Do you have a pet? And do you take good care of it? Maybe just like Jane Goodall. Little People, Big Dreams, Jane Goodall. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Beatrice Shiroshi. When Jane was a little girl, her father gave her a stuffed chimpanzee called Jubilee. She carried him wherever she went. Jane loved animals very much. She wanted to live in the jungle with wild chimpanzees, just like the heroes of her bedtime stories, Tarzan and Jane. At night, her mother read her their adventures. But Jane could not afford to go to university to study animals, so she would have to study them in her own way. She saved every penny she had until she could buy a boat ticket to Kenya in Africa. That is her on the ship, traveling all the way to Africa. When she arrived, Jane met a well-known scientist called Louis Leakey. He was looking for a chimpanzee researcher willing to study them in the wild. He thought that they could learn about humans by studying apes. It was the opportunity Jane had been waiting for. So, Jane took another journey to the shores of Gombe in Tanzania. To start with, she couldn't see any chimpanzees, but she had the feeling that they were near, watching her. You see the chimpanzees at the back? She decided to sit quietly in the same spot, day after day. Finally, a small group of chimpanzees appeared and let her sit with them. Jane had been accepted into the family. Instead of numbering them, as all the other scientists did, Jane decided to give every chimpanzee a name. There was David, Greybeard, Flo, Flint, Fifi, and Kiki, to name a few. By watching them carefully, she noticed that some chimps were kind, quiet, and generous, whilst others were bullies. It seemed that humans and chimps were not so different after all. Then, Jane made another incredible discovery. Chimpanzees could make their own tools. This was something only humans were thought to do. Jane's talent was quickly recognized by Cambridge University. Here, she studied for her doctorate in animal behavior, and it wasn't long before she wrote her first article for one of the most famous science magazines. Jane continued to study chimps in the Gombe for 40 years, but jungles were starting to disappear across Africa, which put all animals in danger. She knew she had to do something. Jane joined countless projects to protect nature. She was no longer just a courageous researcher, but also the most determined wildlife defender the world has ever seen. And the little girl who loved animals challenges us to be kind to nature. Because if chimpanzees can live in harmony with their environment, we can too. Let's go through the history line of Jane Goodall. She was born in 1934 until now. This is a picture of her when she was little in 1935 with a chimpanzee doll. And another picture of her, young Jane, 1940. And as you can see, that looks like her with the binoculars out in the wild in 1965. And that is a picture of Jane Goodall with the chimpanzee, 1995. Jane Goodall was born in London, England. When she was 1, her father gave her a cuddly toy chimpanzee called Jubilee. Some people thought it would scare her, but she loved it. And it fostered her early love of animals. From a young age, Jane dreamt of living in Africa, where she could watch and write about animals. Jane's mother encouraged her dream and told her she must never give up. But when Jane left school, she couldn't afford to go to university to follow her dream. So, she worked hard to save enough money, and in 1957, she traveled to Kenya in Africa. There, she met a very important scientist called Dr. Louise Leakey, who was so impressed with Jane that he hired her as his assistant. Jane traveled to the Gombe Stream Chimpanzee Reserve in Tanzania to study chimps in the wild. At first, it was hard to get close enough to study them, but Jane waited patiently every day, giving them their space. Soon, they accepted her. By watching them closely, Jane made many groundbreaking discoveries. Most importantly, she saw chimps making and using tools. This was something only humans were thought to do. Jane showed that there isn't a sharp divide between humans and primates. After all, later, Jane studied for her doctorate and became a world-leading expert on chimpanzees. Now, Jane dedicates her life to conservation and education, spreading the message that we can all make a difference in the future, to the future of our planet. Isn't that such an inspiring story? And that it's possible for us to protect the nature too, just like the chimpanzees. To be part of the nature and to care for the nature. L.M. Montgomery, Little People, Big Dreams. This book is written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anuska Olympus. This is a special story of a little girl who loved to read and later on in her life became a famous writer. Let's get right into it and know more about L.M. Montgomery. Little People, Big Dreams. L.M. Montgomery, written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anuska Olympus. By Lincoln Children's Books. Little Maud was born on Prince Edward Island in Canada. When she was very small, her mother passed away. Her grandfather, her father, left her in the care of her grandparents and sailed off far away from the little island. Maud left out of place at her grandparents' house. They were strict and grumpy, and it was almost impossible to get a smile out of them. But Maud loved to walk around the island picking berries and naming everything she saw. For her, even apple trees had names, like Little Syrup, Gavin, or Spider. At home, books became Maud's best friends, and she dreamt of becoming a writer one day. But her grandparents thought reading and writing was a waste of time, especially for a girl. So Maud started writing her own stories and poems in secret, smuggling candles into her room at night. She thought about the friends she'd found on her walks and imagined new worlds for them. When Maud was older, she became a teacher. It was not her favorite job, but it gave her time to write stories, and soon one was published in a magazine. Maud was then offered the chance to work at a newspaper. She was the only woman on the staff and wrote her first article under the pen name Cynthia. She loved every minute of her job. But not even 9 months had passed in her new post when her grandfather passed away. Maud had to go back home to take care of her elderly grandmother. But there was no way Maud would give up writing. She accepted a job at the local post office so she could send her work to newspapers without anyone noticing. Before long, 30 of her stories were in the papers. One day, Maud found an old newspaper with an interesting story. It said, "Elderly couple, apple to orphan, asylum for a boy." By mistake, a girl is sent to them. That night, she dreamt of this little girl who became the star of Maud's next story, Anne of Green Gables. Once it was published, everyone loved the little girl with her freckles and thick red plaits. Anne was imaginative, brave, and though she got into scrapes, she was always loved. Through Anne's adventures, Maud rewrote her own childhood as she'd like to have it to be. And by telling Anne's story, Maud, the little girl who wasn't allowed to write, became the great author she always dreamt she could be. This is the biography line of L.M. Montgomery. She was born in 1874 and she died in 1942. The first one is a picture of her in 1883. The next one is a lovely picture of her in 1882. And at 1902, this is a picture of Maud. And lastly, this is a picture of her at 1935. Lucy Maud Montgomery was born in a small wooden house on Prince Edward Island in Canada. Although her name is Lucy, she preferred to be called Maud, without the E. When Maud was 1, her mother became ill and passed away. Her father then moved west to the mainland and sent Maud to live with her grandparents. In the north of the island, Maud's childhood was lonely, as her grandparents showed her little affection or attention. So, she found solace through books, writing, and her imagination. When she was 9, she started writing poetry and journals. By the time she was a teenager, she was already publishing short stories in newspapers throughout North America. As an adult, Maud moved around, working as a teacher and at a newspaper, but had to return home to care for her grandmother. Then one day, she was inspired by a newspaper story about a couple who adopted a child. They wanted a boy, but was sent a girl instead. Maud wrote a novel based on this idea, calling it Anne of Green Gables. At first, it was rejected by every publisher, so she kept it in a hat box and forgot all about it. Then, 2 years later, she tried again. The book found its home and was published to great success. Everyone fell in love with Anne. Maud had created one of the most charming characters children of children's literature had ever seen. Maud went on to write 14 novels and became one of the best-loved authors in Canada and all over the world.
The end. And that's the end of our story time. For more bedtime stories, you can check on our YouTube playlist or listen to more Storytime compilations at the Storyteller Fox. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.